The hands on my shoulders. Power isn't the chair you sit in, it's the hands that lift you there. The strongest people are the ones who make others feel strong. A blessing on your shoulder can weigh more than a crown. Once upon a time in a crowded city lived a poor tailor and his only son. Their room was small. Their meals were simple. But the father's dream was large. My boy will study well and build a life wider than these four walls. By day the father stitched school uniforms and sorry hems. By night he mended jackets by the light of a weak bulb. The treadle of his sewing machine beat like a patient drum. When power failed, he guided the needle by memory, while his son read by a candle stub. Sometimes the father's fingers bled, sometimes his back locked and he stood breathing until the pain softened. He kept going. One more seam, he would say. One more page, the son would answer. They were a team. There were hard months. School fees rose, rent crept up. Once the father took off his old wedding watch, the only fine thing he owned, and pawned it to pay for exam coaching. He handed the receipt to his son and smiled as if it were nothing. The boy tucked it into his book and promised himself he would buy that watch back one day. Years turned. The son studied with a steadiness he borrowed from the pedal of the sewing machine. He passed exams, then entrance tests, then interviews. At first there were rejections, thin letters, kind voices, saying not yet. Each time he came home, the father poured tea and said the same words. We don't stop on the right road. We rest and then we walk again. One morning the right door opened. The son was hired by a firm with bright windows and big hopes. He learned fast, worked clean, listened more than he spoke. People trusted him. Promotions followed. One day the dream arrived, dressed in a title, head of a large company. A top-floor office, a glass wall with the whole city beyond it, a desk that shone like a small lake. The father decided to visit. He wore his festival shirt and the shoes he kept wrapped in newspaper. At the tower's lobby he smoothed his hair and spoke his son's name to the guard. The guard was polite but cautious until the phone call returned with a warm send him up. The elevator rose higher than any staircase in their old lane. The father watched numbers blink past 18, 24 like steps he could never have climbed alone. The office door opened. The son stood up from a leather chair and crossed the room in 3 fast steps. Father, they hugged. A long, wordless embrace that gathered years into one breath. The son guided him to the big chair, but the father shook his head and made his son sit. Then the father moved behind him, placed both hands, hard, careful hands, on his son's shoulders. He looked at the window at the city he had stitched himself into without ever leaving the shop and asked, half teasing, half serious, "Tell me, my son, who do you think feels like the most powerful man in the world right now?" The son, full of joy and a good kind of pride, answered too quickly, "I do, father. I feel like the most powerful person." The father's smile flickered. He had hoped for a different answer. A small ache opened in his chest. He patted his son's shoulders once, gently, and stepped back. "Right," he said softly. "Very good." He turned toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. He looked back at the boy who had become a man, at the chair that had looked too big yesterday and just right today. In the silence, the son stood up, walked to his father, and took his hands. "Do you still think you are the most powerful person?" the father asked. The son's voice changed, calmer now, washed with gratitude. "No, father. If anyone here is the most powerful, it's you." Once upon a time, a son became very powerful, so powerful that he could move mountains. One evening he came to visit his father. The father frowned. "But a moment ago you said you felt the most powerful." The son smiled, eyes warm. "I felt that way because your hands, the hands of the most powerful person I know, were on my shoulders. When they rested there, I felt I could carry anything." Time slowed. The city outside kept moving, but inside the office everything went quiet and bright. The father's eyes filled. All the years of mending and saving, of late nights and early mornings, were suddenly heavy and light at once. He drew his son into a hug, the kind that says what words cannot. They stood like that for a while, one man who had climbed, and one who had lifted. After the quiet, the son said, "Come, let me show you." He walked his father through the office. He introduced him not as my parent, but as the man who made this possible. The staff saw a tailor with careful hands and a dignity that did not need a title. The father saw a team that trusted his son and nodded to himself. Good, he remembers where he came from. In the conference room, the son opened a drawer and set a small box on the table. Inside lay the old wedding watch, polished and ticking. "I bought it back," he said, voice low. "With my first bonus, some things must not be left in a pawn shop." The father touched the watch and laughed softly. the sound of a knot loosening. They sat by the glass and talked about ordinary things, the price of thread, the tea seller who still saved the strongest brew for the tailor, the stray cat that had adopted their lane. The son picked up a file and said, "We're starting a program to source uniforms from small neighborhood shops. Fair rates, steady orders." He glanced at his father. "I think I know one talented tailor." The father shook his head. "I'll keep my shop small," he said, smiling. "But I'll train 3 young men to take on your orders. Let more hands learn a craft." Evening came. The son rode home with his father on the bus rather than sending a car. They stood like they used to, eyes meeting over the sway of the crowd. Back in the lane, the tailor set his festival shoes by the door. The son brewed tea the way his mother had taught him. They sat at the same wooden table where homework once lived. The son placed his new business card next to the old measuring tape. 2 tools, 2 lives, 1 story. Before bed, the father stepped into the little shop. He ran a thumb along the machine's worn table. He imagined those same hands resting again on his son's shoulders at the next hard decision, the next long day, the next joy. He smiled. Power had never been the office or the title. It was the blessing that steadied the person who carried both.